Hey everyone! Welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today I'm going to be talking about how change comes out of necessity. This week's guest is Andrea Alejandra Gonzales, who is a queer mestiza youth organizer and advocate. I really loved Andrea's energy and passion, and I know you will too. I'm super excited to share this conversation with you. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Awesome. So I'm just going to do like my whole spiel that I usually give. So my name is Andrea Alejandra Gonzales, pronouns she, her, hers. I am a queer mestiza youth organizer and advocate. I've been an organizer since I was 15 years old, and I've been working at the intersection of race and gender justice since the age of 15. But recently, I have been working more with abolitionist theory, and I call myself an abolitionist. I'm advocate for the abolition of prisons and police, as well as the transformation of our society as a whole, and reimagining the systems that we interact with and the way that we interact with each other. And I'm also the director of operations at Youth Over Guns.
Awesome. I am so excited to be talking with you, and I just want to start off by congratulating you on making this year's Teen Vogue 21 Under 21 list. That's so huge and it's so exciting. Your title in the feature article was All Around Advocate. What do you think about that title? Do you think it fits?
I think it does fit. I mean, I've been organizing for 5 years now, since I was 15, and I've been involved in a lot of different movements. I've been here before Trump was elected. I was here before March for Our Lives, and so I've been a part of and seen the way that young people step up to the plate when no one else will. And so I have been so graciously a part of these movements. You know, I've been a part of feminist movements, and I still am. I'm here for gender justice, and I'm here for supporting and cherishing gender expansive young people. And I've been here even before my work with gender justice. I live in Staten Island, and this is the community where Eric Gardner died. And so I've been talking about police brutality and racism within the institution and ideologically for a very long time, especially in a place as New York City, which is super progressive, but we have police officers killing Black folks on a very regular basis. And so again, I'm just so grateful that I have been alive in a time period where we are in a transition between the wisdom of our elders and then this new rising of a active generation in the change of our country. And I've just been a part of it all, and I'm really happy that I have been. And so I think All Around Advocate is pretty accurate, but obviously, I think that advocacy looks so many different ways, and folks, there's so many different ways that it looks like, and that's the beautiful part of advocacy. And definitely in some topics, I'm a little bit still, there's a word for it. I'm still a novice in talking about some topics, but I do think that I like to give my heart and my soul and everything about my energy to every single movement that I can, just because I want to make sure that the resources that I do have are being given to folks who are really truly making change on the ground. But I was thinking about that article, and I was really hoping they would really tap into this side, because on my Instagram I call myself a radical lover, and I was like, that'd be super cool if they called me that, but they didn't, and that's totally fine. But yeah, All Around Advocate's still really cool.
I love that title so much, and it definitely seems fitting. I'd really like to talk some about your work as a queer mestiza advocate. What challenges have you faced, and what experiences did you have that brought you to this position in life, where you felt like you needed to advocate for those communities?
Absolutely. And so I think it's really important to consider that everybody who's an organizer right now, or has ever been an organizer, comes to this work because it's out of necessity. Someone who is dedicated to uplifting communities are often here because they have experienced violence in their own capacity. And so they're here because they've seen the way that they have personally been impacted by violence, of any kind, just not gun violence, because, not having food on the table is violence, not having clean water is violence. All these things are violent. And so when we have these personal experiences with violence, we are moved to be part of these movements in a larger way, because we see the way that our communities have been isolated, we have been ignored, the way that we're completely silenced out of conversations that directly impact us. And so I would say that the way that I got involved in this work was like, at my birth, being a brown woman, a brown queer woman, a brown mestizo woman, all of these identities interlocking required me to be part of these movements. And then additionally, like, my father was an organizer back in his home country. And so listening to stories of his organizing work and listening to his radicalization and his politic definitely pushed me on this path. I remember like my earliest conversations with my father, I remember I was like 4 years old, and we were talking about the Afghanistan war, which is like a super iffy topic for a toddler, but like I was genuinely curious as we were living in like, this war on terror. And so I was seeing it on the news all the time. And I remember those conversations, we were talking about how dangerous capitalism is and how they will really put Black and brown bodies on the line just to protect the state, to protect, the elite. And I've carried that conversation through the work that I do. And so that's how I got informally involved in organizing. But the first time I organized was in high school, and there was like a photography series that I did with my friend. You can actually see it on my wall, like up there, if you see that. So I did these photographs, and I was like shirtless in them, and my school like totally freaked out. And it was like a whole thing in my community. I live in Staten Island, so it's a very small community. And so having these photos of a teenager talking about rape culture and talking about the criminalization of the bodies of girls was a very intense topic on the island. And so with that project and with that movement that I started at my school, I was really involved like head first into organizing and mobilizing my community members into talking about gender-based violence. And yeah, I think that answers your question.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that background. I'd love to talk a little bit more about those photos. So, you took the photos, and then they were censored by your school and got more attention from there. Tell me more about that story.
Totally. And so like some background information about myself, like in high school, I was like super duper shy. Like I wouldn't even raise my hand in a class. And I was just like a very quiet person. And so like this photography series was like super like abstract to me, just because I was nervous about being in a photography series, but my friend needed support on her photography projects. I was like, okay, I'm totally going to help you out. And I didn't think much of it. And so I thought it was just like a really cool opportunity to talk about feminism and rape culture, just because I have already been discussing that for a longer time in like, smaller groups. And with that photography series, so we just thought nothing of it. We submitted it like a normal homework assignment. And the photography professor at our high school submitted it to be showcased in the yearly spring thing, like the art show. And so all the photography projects, all the art projects would be displayed in the main lobby of the school. And we had like a really, really long main lobby where folks would have to walk through to get to any class. And so we were like on the first billboard of the hallway. And, those are the photos. And I was like shirtless. And I remember my friend came and ran to me in my lunch period. Was like, oh my God, they put the photos up. And we ran outside to see the lobby, and they saw my pictures. And I was like so proud that this got up. And so it's going to be a conversation starter, something to start a conversation with dress codes in the school. And within the same period, the photography project was taken down. And my friend came in and said, they took it down. They think it's pornographic. They think it's inappropriate. And so they're not having it anymore. And I remember going back to my lunch table. I got up just now to take a picture with it, sat down. And in that time period, I was told that it was taken down. And I sat down again at my lunch table, and I was just so furious. I was like, how could they possibly take down such an important piece of work, an important conversation that needed to be had? How could they do this? And I was just angrily eating my lunch, and I was like, I'm going to do something about it. And so I started brainstorming with my friends at the table, and they were like totally supporting my antics. And I was just like thinking and like, okay, we could do a petition, we could do this and that. And I remember that night, I started a petition online asking for the photos to be put back up. And within the first night, we got like 1,000 responses, like, signatures saying like, put the photos back up. And again, Staten Island's a very small community. So within that first night, news networks on the island started like popping up too. And so I was on a few news stations the next day, just talking about like why we need to put it back up, why it was important to the community. They even interviewed like some kids from my school, and they were all supportive of it too. So it was really cool to see like my work not only being limited to that news network, but actually also impacting the other students I went to school with. But the sad part is that they never really let us put up the original photos again. However, they let us do a photography series with shirts on our backs, which is super gross. They put shirts on our back, and we had to like write paint stuff on the back of the shirts. And so we took a few jabs at the school, like on those shirts, but we were still pretty mad. And in the process of like trying to get them back up, we were being blackmailed by professors. We were getting blackmailed by the school. Like it was a very violent situation between me, my friend, and then the institution who was trying to censor and silence this art project. But then like a year later, the conversation started again, where we submitted these photos into a few competitions. And so we got them up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and also Capitol Hill in DC. And so that was like a really cool like celebration moment. And I wish that they did go back and up in the lobby. But I think that, we win and we lose. And it's not that we lose, but we learn a lesson. And like, I think maybe we should have taken more radical steps into like, putting pressure on the administration, saying like, okay, you don't want the project up, but we need to have a conversation about these dress codes and the way that you treat young women in this school. But it's a really, I miss that. I miss being a young person and thinking so on my feet. And I mean, I'm still like that, but it was definitely different since it was my first time doing it on my own. But yeah, that was like a really cool moment, I guess.
I love that story. It's super cool. Your activism stretches across so many different issues, as we've talked about. And I've talked to a bunch of activists who find it difficult to wrap their heads around and advocate for just one tough issue, let alone a handful like you're doing. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the different issues that you're working with?
Yeah, I definitely do get overwhelmed. Like at least like once a week, I like just like completely crumble. Like it's just all of these things. I've been working in this for 5 years, and like I'm well aware, like my ancestors and my elders have been fighting the systems for way longer. But I don't know. Like I remember being like a disillusioned preteen and was saying, we're in the 21st century, things are going to get better a lot faster. And then being directly in the policy making, directly being in the organizing work, and you see firsthand how slowly things move and how often your hard work kind of like makes zero impact on an institutional system of violence. It's disheartening. Like you look at the way that you put your whole heart into it, and the systems are still broken. I mean, not broken, like they're working as intention, but they're still acting in the same type of violent way. And if not, they are evolving their violence in order to become more covert. And so it's very stressful, being knowledgeable about so many different things and being conscious of the ways that so many systems impact us, and not being able to see the solution so clearly. But I think that, the thing that helps me out in these moments of crisis and these moments of overwhelmedness, I really do look to my mentors and my friends. And like, I have so many. There's this one book that I always read when I'm like stressed out. It's called Emergent Strategy, and by Adrienne Marie Brown, my favorite book ever. And she talks so much about Afrofuturism and just also like the hope that we have, and like this ability to be in this moment and do something about it is so important, because no matter what we do, no matter what we want to do, or no matter what we do with our time right now, the future is coming. That is 100% certain. The present is only a fleeting second, and the future is already here. And so it's really important to do something in this exact moment, because the future is going to be impacted by whatever thought that you have, whatever action that you take. And so nothing is too small for the future. Anything can change in a couple of seconds. And so I think about that. And I also think about the way that we won't necessarily succeed in all of our movements within this lifetime. We're not in this decade, not in this year. But what we can do is make sure that we leave a blueprint for the next generation so they can pick where we left off. Whenever we get too tired, when we get burnt out, when our bodies are telling us to rest, we are giving it into good hands of young people that we shared our wisdom with our knowledge. We gave them our tools and our love so they can be cherished, hold that love in them, and they're going to take it and run with it farther than we could ever imagine. And with that energy that young people have, they can invent new vocabulary words to describe what we're experiencing, and they can invent new systems of justice and new ways to love each other. And that's what makes me energized again. When things are super bad, when someone else dies, when these systems continue to take so much from us, it's really important that we keep on giving to ourselves and the next generation. So, at least we can still dream. That's the only thing that they can't take away. And so dreaming is something that I'm really passionate about. And so I think that's what gives me hope when things kind of, look really rough.
Definitely. I love your energy. It's so inspiring and so motivating. So, this next question is something that I've been thinking about, and I'd love to get your take on it. Do you ever feel like some activists and movements are working against each other because they're single-minded in fighting for their own issue more than others? Or maybe they're neglecting to include other groups in their fight for justice and equality?
Yeah, and so I think there's like a couple of questions in that question. So I think there is some strife between organizations, especially since everyone's at a different level of consciousness, a different level of radicalization. And so we have all different solutions to the issues what we encounter. There's still folks in our spaces that advocate for police reform rather than police defunding or police abolition. And so those are just a few things that we contradict on. So we're saying, okay, all these people are dying at the hands of the police. What is the solution? We get a million different responses. And so that does create some conflict. But, I think that's normal. I think that not only encourages growth, but it also encourages radicalization. And so I think that it makes everyone get onto the same page faster when we discuss these differences in our thoughts and our thinking processes. But there was another question in that you asked, and I think it was about the single-minded one, about the single track activism. And to that, I'd say that it's okay to focus on one solely. I think that being extremely knowledgeable on one thing is so important because you're able to return the information to folks who don't have the time necessarily to get invested into that one field. And so I think being able to be on one track, I think it's okay. But what makes a difference is that understanding the way that one track impacts so many different people is really important. So, when we're doing, education justice, right? We can't just only talk about the institution of education, but also think about the races and the identities that come into these institutions and how they lead. And we also need to talk about maybe the criminalization of young people in the institutions, through metal detectors and police officers and just literally the architecture of these schools, right? And so it all is education related, but there's so many different conversations to be had within the education conversation. And so another thing about education is we can't only talk about the curriculum, but we also need to talk about the policies of punishment. How do we get rid of punitive policies? How do we make sure that we encourage communities that are based in transformative justice and restorative justice, and making sure that we're not criminalizing Black and brown bodies who come into the school. And so I think being on a one track is okay as long as we do see the way that it intersects with so many other things. And I think that, I encourage folks to be on that one track, to, make sure that we are absorbing every bit of information and analyzing and nitpicking everything about a single institution so that we can then share that knowledge with a larger group of people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A new movement of activism for young people has obviously been social media, and I'd love to get your take on how it affects today's movements. How has social media affected your activism, and what advice do you have for people who may be using it as a tool?
Awesome. I'm so happy you asked that. So I think social media definitely has its pros and its cons. In terms of pros, it's such an amazing platform to connect with other young people. Every single young person is on it. And that's a whole different conversation about the monopoly of social media and how they're just brainwashing us to always be on a screen. But, the positive of that is that we have access to a platform constantly. You in the past, it used to be at rallies or at panels that you only got to encounter this incredible language and this incredible knowledge. But now on social media, it's accessible. It's tangible. We can touch it. We can edit it. We can interact with it. We can analyze it all in the moment. And I think that's so beautiful. That's how we develop our knowledge. That's how we bring people into our movements, when we make it accessible. Because a lot of times when I meet young people, the thing that's like pushing them away from joining an organization or doing a thing is that they don't think they know enough to be part of something. And so when you have social media and you have all that knowledge accessible, you get to, guide people towards that, and they feel encouraged to learn more. But then on the flip side of that, social media is incredibly performative. We know that, the way that people like only post certain pictures so they look really good, or they post only like vacation pictures to look like they're always on vacation, or like people posting graphics and then doing none of the work afterwards. And so, you can put a bunch of like pretty infographics about, the prison industrial complex, but if you're not actively organizing these people, or at least giving them the tools to continue that knowledge building, or figuring out a way to support the organizers that are doing the work, it kind of just ends. Like there's just like a point where people just don't want to look anymore because there's no like ways to go. And so I think that's like really important, that we're not being performative about it. We can't just pretend and like put on a show that we care about Black lives and we care about these things. It's not like it's becoming a trend. That's what it is. Like the way that Fashion Nova talked about Breonna Taylor's death and George Floyd's death, but did nothing to donate to those families, or did nothing to support the people who were being jailed at these protests. And so it's all very for show, and it's very, very dangerous to do that. And the thing with Blackout Tuesday, that was so dangerous. I think the idea in the beginning was like pretty okay. I think the organizers said that, it was a day where like, allies would just kind of sit back and learn and not take up the space with like, absent-minded things. And that's a pretty good idea. A lot of times our feeds are filled with a lot of nonsense. And so if it was like just a day filled with infographics and knowledge and resources, that'd be a pretty cool thing. But what people did instead was put a black square and hashtag it Black Lives Matter, therefore polluting the Black Lives Matter hashtag, completely destroying the timeline and the algorithm with black squares, and completely silencing all the things that were happening that day. That day, there was probably hundreds of protests happening internationally. That day, probably hundreds of people were arrested. Those were the things that needed to be highlighted. And instead, we just had a feed full of black squares. And that's incredibly performative. That was like, saying like, oh, I support Black lives, so I'm going to post a black square. And what did that do? Did that protect a Black life? Did that share a resource? Did that free someone from a jail? Like, it did none of that. And so I think social media can be used for good. Social media is the reason why we have like, really cool protests. When we share a flyer online, we have so many folks coming and panels and information, and that's beautiful. But there's a line to be drawn when it comes to this stuff. And sometimes false information can be spread as well. Like I know there's like a lot of accounts right now that are kind of taking over these spaces to be like, the highest authority on social justice. And it's just not helpful whatsoever. And it's not even a good take on the issue. Like it's a super superficial one. And so it's difficult to see like, the pros and the cons, and they kind of even out at the end. But it's also just really important to consider that social media is only one tool in our really big organizing toolbox. There are so many things that we can do. And so utilizing social media isn't a bad thing, but just make sure that we're recognizing there's other tools and other means to be used in order to get, to our collective liberation.
Definitely. That's a really interesting perspective. Thank you for explaining that. I have kind of a lighter question now. What do you do for fun or to de-stress when you need a little break from your activism?
Okay, that's a really good question. I love seeing my friends. Pre-pandemic, I would see them in person, but I would like call up a friend when I feel really anxious or I need to just vent. Just hearing someone else's voice other than like my own feels really good sometimes. And I also love to buy flowers. I love flowers. I love gardening. Like in the summertime, I had my own little garden. I had like an amazing harvest of jalapenos this year. So I love gardening, and that's what was like my go-to de-stressing in the summertime. And again, like books. I love books, and I've been like for the past few years I've been like so focused on getting information about social justice from nonfiction books, and so that kind of like drained me a little bit. I was like, I need to get information. It was like kind of like an obsession I had. But now for a class I recently take for school, it was a Black women's writers class, and we had to read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and it changed my life. Quite literally changed my life, and I completely recommend it to anybody. But like, I think that gave me the most information about social justice and envisioning a brighter future, a liberated future, more than any other book I've read. And so I love reading science fiction books. Like, I'm a total nerd. I love science. And what's another thing? I like to dance as well. I love dancing. I'm not a professional dancer in any kind of way, but I do enjoy like just dancing in my room, or like dancing in the sunshine in the summertime. That was like my go-to thing too.
Oh, that's so cool. I love the dancing tip. That's great. So, I have kind of a signature question that I like to ask all of my guests. Lots of young people, particularly college students, want to create change and they want to make a difference around the world, but they may not know where to get started. What advice do you most want to share with these young people?
Yeah, so I think that I have like there's so much things to be said about folks who aren't involved yet, but I think first centering like, you know, love as the most important thing. Like, we're not doing this for ego, we're not doing this for popularity, we're not doing it for followers. We're doing it for love, for ourselves, for the community, and I think that should be like the rooting thing that everyone does this work for. Love to and love for a brighter future, love for everything in this world, and I think that's something that people should really center. And then also, for anyone who hasn't gotten involved, activism does not look like one way. You do not always have to be on the front lines kicking gas cans back at the police. That is not the only role that exists. There are healers, there are teachers, there are video editors, there are lawyers. There are so many people necessary in this movement. So you don't have to major in poli-sci to be an activist. We need anti-racist doctors. We need anti-racist teachers. There's so many different ways. The ways are infinite. Our communities are filled with so many different jobs, and we can totally bring this knowledge of social justice into these jobs. And so just do what feels right, and do what you love, and incorporate building a better world into that. And it's a little hard, but with patience and talking to people who are on the same page as you definitely find your way a lot easier. And so just have trust in yourself and trust in the process of figuring out how you can best contribute to this movement, and then everything will be fine.
I absolutely love talking with Andrea because of her wonderful energy and optimism about the future. She really is a radical lover that came into activism out of compassion for others. Andrea felt the need to speak up for herself and her friends when their pictures were censored, because she recognized that change comes out of necessity. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can follow Andrea on Instagram at MestizaWomanist. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys!